If you'll come with me, you'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too.
You float too!
A Stephen King podcast.
Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of We All Float Down Here, a Stephen King podcast. I'm Oscar,
I'm Simon.
and today we are going to be talking about the classic ghost story and horror novel, The Shining by Stephen King.
One of the big items in the Stephen King catalogue, not just the book, but of course the 1980 movie version, Stanley Kubrick, Shelley Duvall, R.I.P., and Jack Nicholson. We are also going to talk about the 1997 Shining TV movie, but we're going to talk about the book. And do you want to outline the synopsis, and then we'll get into what we thought of it, how we discovered it, and we'll go from there.
So, The Shining, for anyone who doesn't know, even though this is possibly one of the most iconic stories ever told, it is a story of a struggling husband who is writing a play, and he decides to apply for a job to be the hotel caretaker for the winter at the Overlook Hotel as it's shut down, and the snow starts to come, the connections are cut, and he starts to suffer cabin fever, and then slowly starts to go insane. And there's a lot more to it, but we'll go in depth in that in this episode.
I want to declare right at this point that, you know, maybe like a lot of people, I grew up watching the movie. I knew the movie
Same.
so well that I never read the book. I had this copy of the book, which is not a particularly nice edition. It's got a terribly small font, and this sat on my shelf for years, always keen to read it, but every time I went to pick it up, I just kept thinking about how I knew the story inside out. Of course, the story in the movie is a little bit different. I've collected these 4 different versions. This is the one of the 1980 reprints, so not quite a movie tie-in, but obviously reprinted when the movie came out. This is a more recent one, same as your copy. We like this one though because it's got a bit of a secondhand store geek that goes around and picks up things like this, which has got this lovely message in it from one person to another about how this is such a great book and they can't wait to discuss this book and discuss the movie, and how it was their personal copy that they gave away. So Norma, if you're watching this, it's in good hands. We have it now, and if you're not watching this, if someone knows Norma and feels bad that they traded in the book, I hope it was for a good reason. I hope it was because you were traveling and you were running out of space or needed money. I've also got this version, which I don't know. I love this version. I don't know much about it, but I just love. It's quite a sci-fi looking cover. Yeah. So funnily enough, I ended up not reading any of these versions. I read the Kindle version because the font was better.
Yeah. So same with you, I had watched the movie multiple times before even reading a single Stephen King book, let alone the actual source material. And funnily enough, when I decided to get into it, I read it on the Kindle as well, because I only had this copy at the time, and even though this font isn't that small, it's like, I don't find it that small now. When I was a bit younger, I found this really unbearable. And recently, I read it in this edition for the first time, and same thing. The movie's really familiar in my head at this point, so it was hard to sort of jump into the Stephen King version, knowing that they're super different.
Well, I'd also seen the 97 version of the movie, which is far closer to the book, and we'll get into that. But so I did know also that I was missing out on I knew what I was about, I knew what I'd been missing out on in the book. So that kind of also made it difficult to give the book a go. I'm glad I finally did, but I had this book on my shelf all through the 90s, and then I finally read it, in about 2020, 2021. I liked it, but I like it more now that a bit of time has passed and I've been able to think about it a bit more.
Yeah, so that being said, we should get fully into our review of The Shining.
Yeah, what works, what doesn't work, what we like.
What we like about this book. When I first read it, I really liked it. Loved it. On the Kindle, it was really cool. What did you think about it when you first read it?
I really liked it. I loved the backstory that I was receiving, that right from the get-go, that is either not in the movie at all, or it's implied and it's different. It's there, but it's really there for people who have the familiarity of the story. So key things there are that Jack Torrance, the protagonist, he has this history of alcoholism. He has this, I guess you'd call it a history of physical child abuse, in that he has injured his own son, Danny, and he's been a teacher, and he's cracked one of the students. He's got into you get it in a flashback, and the student slashes the tires of his car.
It's a great flashback. It's a great chapter.
So
you also get the better detail about him when he injured his son. Also, when you get into the book, you also figure out that he was psychologically and physically injured by his own father.
Exactly. And so there's the history of violence, history of abuse stuff in there. It's all pretty deep in the book. All stuff that was essentially removed from the original movie, really, because it's not the story Kubrick wanted to tell, and it's hampering his plot and what he wants to get out of it, which we'll discuss. But I loved that. But at the same time, I was faced with this thing of, I'm still reading a story. I pretty much know what's going to happen. So I lumbered through some of it, but
I remember it took you a long time.
Yeah, but
I barely picked it up.
I was just really struggling to connect with it. When I finally did, and then on a reread, I really was able to let go of the movie and just go, right, this is its own thing. And the writing is exquisite, I think, for the most part, for the majority of the book.
In my opinion, is the start of Stephen King's absolute genius.
Yeah, so we talked about Salem's Lot being a big lift up from Carrie. This is another huge level up, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Carrie and Salem's Lot are both great. I love them. I gave Carrie a 7.5, and Salem's Lot an 8 or an 8.5. This is just a step up from an even bigger step up. It is completely genius what Stephen King does here. He sort of takes this classic ghost story and sort of shifts it into something a little bit more personal and darker, which he sort of explains was his intention in the introduction, which I want to get into a little bit. He says he liked the idea of exploring a wacky, weird, and scary supernatural horror story, but also having it with a father and a person who has his own personal demons, rather than just scary, spooky monster demons. And it's became this huge debate on both sides of Jack Torrance and his character, whether or not it was the alcoholism and his youth that sort of turned him into such an evil character, or if it was the ghosts in the hotel. In the introduction, Stephen King says that it's a mixture of both, and that he always considered there to be real ghosts turning him into, a real evil, disgusting, despicable character, which is kind of what's sad about this book. This book is kind of sad. You watch him turn from a loving father into just a animal, like a complete psycho. And even though from the get-go, there are problems. You can straight from the start, you can tell he's a bit of a hothead, and he's obviously taken that out on his son. You can still see that he loves them, and there is a relationship going on there.
Yeah, and I think I referenced this when we were talking about Salem's Lot, that we get a little bit into the idea that King goes further into the writer as narrator, as persona, where he's making it personal, where he's basically saying, see if you can spot me, I'm right here, this is me. It's me with some different clothes on. It's not entirely me, but it's me. And, the book is dedicated to Joe Hill King, which is his first son, who goes under the name Joe Hill now as a writer and writes comic books and novels, and The Black Phone, one of his short stories, is made into a movie recently. Great film. And so Joe Hill was really young when The Shining was conceived, and the idea of injuring Danny is something that he talks about. He never hit his own son, but he felt, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it's in the intro or if it's in an interview I read, but he talks about...
Probably not in this intro, because I read the intro.
Okay, so he talks about, I never hit my own son, but I had a moment where I was frustrated. And parents know this feeling, I think, of you'd never hurt your child, but you're frustrated in the moment, you're not going to do it. You don't do it, but you might tell someone, oh, I could have done this, and in a way that's what he's doing in sort of nearly 500 pages, going, I could have done this could have happened. And it's inseparable from King's biography too, because this is a period where he's drinking a lot, and this carries on through into the 80s. The books from here, they get a little bit indulgent and a little bit, a little bit weird, and could do with a bit more of an edit, some of them, and we'll probably talk about that in the weeks to come. But this is still pretty immaculate, really, for a big book. Mostly it's pretty great, and there's nothing I would cut out of it. I just wish, it's the same for me as with Salem's Lot. I just wish I'd read this when I was a teenager. I watched the film so many times. The film had such a huge impact on me, and continues to, that this will always be a little bit second in my, my appreciation of my life. But I'm so glad I finally got to it and found enough of a way to appreciate it for the writing. I think the chapters and the pages where we find out about Jack's backstory are beautifully told. And you touched on this. The book is so much more of a family-oriented story than the film is. The book has a lot of sadness, and the book is about Danny.
And Danny is one of the best characters Stephen King has ever written, undoubtedly. It's really his book in a way, and just also seeing this perspective, this hauntingly dark book from the perspective of a 6-year-old boy is just really well done and great. It's just such a fun way to get into it.
And King obviously loved the character because he goes on to write the sequel. Many years later, he writes Dr. Sleep.
So we're not going to talk about Dr. Sleep in this video, because that's a whole other book in the 2010s, but when we get to that, we'll go in depth on that. It's got a movie adaptation and everything. Technically, it is definitely part of the Stephen King canon, but obviously it's a whole different book, so we're not going to go into that.
Yeah, but it's basically about Danny as an adult. So, and Danny has these, one thing we haven't been super clear on in the plot of this is, outside of all the stuff that's going on with Jack, Danny, his son, has the ability to shine, which is the
ability of sort of being able to read people's minds and have conversations with other people that shine. Yeah. And without
it's a type of telepathy and a type of So he can he has Tony, essentially a play on an imaginary friend.
Yeah,
which
and
children have.
He gets these visions and sees them, and we can tell him things about the hotel at the start of this book.
That's right. So
the other person that he shines with massively in this book, and who's an amazing character, is Dick Hallorann, who is a cook at the Overlook Hotel, and he's a really nice, funny character. He's charming. And he can just tell from straight away, just taking one look at him, he can tell that Danny has the shining, and he says to Danny, none of the things in this hotel can hurt you, they're just like pictures in books, and that sort of repeats itself throughout the whole book. Whenever Danny sees a ghost or something creepy, he has to remind himself that. And Dick Hallorann also says, if something bad happens, you can call at me, and I might even be able to sense you from states away.
And that's an interesting point that I really, through the movie as an adult and as a parent, and then finally reading the book, that really hit me, this idea that because in both treatments of the story, the parents are a little bit like worried about Danny and his powers, because they don't understand them, and they essentially just think it's a response to the trauma that he's faced, and it is on some level, but that's all they understand it as, and it takes the character of Dick Hallorann to bring that out, and that's really, really interesting, and that's so well dealt with, particularly in the book, in the movie as well, but particularly in the book. And as you say, they're both really great characters, and they're a little bit more fleshed out in the book than they maybe are in the film. Yeah.
When I reread this, I loved it a lot more. When I read it for the first time, I still really, really liked it, and I could appreciate it as being a masterpiece. Now, not only can I appreciate it as a masterpiece, I love it. I love it so much. I think it's a really great book. However, I'm not sure if you sort of get this, but it does reach some slumps in some areas. From around about page 100 to 200, maybe page 300 to 400, that type of thing. It gets a little bit like...
Well, it's that Stephen King thing of, I'm going to supply so much backstory, I'm going to give you the ins and outs of the motivations of these characters, that not a lot plot-wise is going to happen for a bit, but I'm going to pack all of this in. And then, of course, he's really good with plot. Like, you know, one of the great things that gets up so many of us interested in his books is not just interesting plot lines, but they move, when they get moving, they really move along, right? But yeah, you are right. Like, that's why I said this is mostly close to perfect. Yeah, you are right. Like, there are some things in this book that I would edit out. But that's that King thing that he does, where he pumps in a lot of backstory, the motivations of the characters, but he does give us plenty of plot, and he's so good at plot, and that's why I think that's why so many of us read what he does and love these books and are still talking about them years after they came out. I love what you said about this being the big announcement of Stephen. Like, this is the proof, if Carrie was the nervous introduction, then Salem's Lot was the strong audition, and this is the proof, right?
100%.
This is the writer appearing before us with a few things in his back catalogue to back this up, so that this is no fluke.
100%. He really just packs a punch with this book. There are so many great scenes. The wasps are great. The lady in 217, room 217. The hedge animals, they're really fun to read about. But a bit goofy, but in a really fun way. Just great parts of this book. I love, I know we already said this, but I just want to say, I love the scene where we get that flashback of George Hatsfield and the thing that happened when he was a school teacher. Yeah. And
it's creepy too, right, this book? There are some real moments of...
I would say that this is probably top 3 scariest Stephen King books I read. And I don't usually get scared by books.
Yeah, same.
I'm not the type of guy to get scared of books, not even really movies. So I'm not like saying I was like shivering while reading this. It is really scary for a book, in my opinion.
And I love, I guess, in these early books, I mean, I'm sure he's still doing it and people are still spotting it, but in these early books, we can always think about how Stephen King is keen to show that he's a student of horror. Now he's kind of the horror master, so it's funny to think of him as still a student. I'm sure he would say he still is, but you really feel, and he shows you that he's done the reading, he's watched the movies, he's grown up with the different versions of Frankenstein and Dracula, he loves Shirley Jackson, he loves the Hammer horror stuff, he's right into all of the old-fashioned scary movies and books, and he's putting his twist on it.
True.
And you totally feel that, I think, in his 70s and early 80s work especially.
Definitely. And the ending of this book really packs a punch as well. You have Dick Hallorann coming down the country to save them, which is a lot different from what happens in the movie. He saves them, Jack forgets to turn the boiler off, and the place basically explodes. But before that, there's a scene in this book where Jack Torrance is almost going to kill Danny, like he has him ready to kill, and then he decides to spare him, which is just really bringing that human feel to the book in one of the greatest, if not the greatest scenes in this book. Is just so good. Absolutely incredible. I forgot that it happened, and so that really surprised me on reread. Really good. Does that wrap up what we want to say about the book?
Yeah, I just want to actually go and fit this on to the end. Like, if people have been thinking, like me, like you, I know the film so well, why would I read the book? In this edition, which I've switched to, how good is this intro blurb to hook you on it? I mean, this just is perfect. Danny was only 5 years old, but in the words of old Mr. Hallorann, he was a shiner, aglow with psychic voltage. When his father became caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, his visions grew frighteningly out of control. As winter closed in and blizzards cut them off completely, the hotel seemed to develop a life of its own. It was meant to be empty, but who was the lady in room 217? And who were the masked guests going up and down in the elevator? And why did the hedges shaped like animals seem so alive? Somewhere, somehow, there was an evil force in the hotel. And that too had begun to shine.
Just
I mean,
saying,
that's so good,
both
right?
of the blurbs, I just realised have that. Yeah,
it's
that's
so
really good. I 100% recommend this book, even if you are a fan of the movie. You just got to go in knowing that it is different. This is Stephen King's story. This is a more human story rather than a sort of discombobulated, wacky thing that we'll get into in the movie very soon.
What are you going to rate it?
I'm going to rate this a 9 out of 10, a solid 9, which I'd give it a 7 based on the first read, but I think this book is incredible, super good, top tier, 9 out of 10.
I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10
Fair,
for the reasons that I stated. Same feeling as Salem's Lot. Amazing book. I think it's a better book. Amazing book. I just wish that I had read it sooner. I wish that I hadn't overpowered myself with multiple rewatches of the film so that I'd put this off. But I'm so glad I got to it, and I'm so glad that I got to it a few years ago and I've actually read it a couple of times. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for me. And now we're going to talk about Stanley Kubrick's movie, which comes out in 1980, and alongside, okay, so there's already been the Carrie movie and the Salem's Lot movie.
And this one that comes out 1 year after the Salem's
That's
Lot movie.
in a couple of years. I mean, they started making this film in '78, so straight after the book came out, because that's he's become this hot ticket, Stephen King. Like, he writes stories that are going to get turned into films. And
yeah, you basically
this
just know.
has carried on ever since. It's an amazing run. But The Shining is one of the great adaptations. And there's several, this is a book I've got specifically about the movie. There's several books like this, and I've read a few of them. This is the only one that I have. This is a good little set of essays with some images from the book. But famously, Stephen King wasn't a huge fan of the movie.
He hates this.
Yeah.
He really hated it.
I think he's come around a bit with time because it's done the business for him. But
he's chilled out.
yeah.
But he hated Stanley Kubrick for it, pretty much.
There's all sorts of stories about how they would ring each other in the middle of the night and hurl abuse, that they were cross with each other. And again, that's probably been blown up a bit, but they certainly had a heated conversation, if not several. And Kubrick, of course, in his film career, and we love Kubrick. I think it's fair.
We need to say that.
We love Kubrick.
This was my first Kubrick movie. I'm not sure if it was yours.
Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Full Metal Jacket was my first.
So, this was far before any other Stanley Kubrick movie, because I watched this when I was a lot younger.
Yeah.
Or not a lot younger, quite a bit younger. When I was about year 5, and it was my introduction to Kubrick, and then recently I went on a Kubrick binge watching Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket. What are the other ones?
2001.
2001. Love those movies, and I really need to see Barry Lyndon. But yeah, Stanley Kubrick is an incredible director.
And he's famous for many things, but one of the things that he did throughout his career was take novels or source material of the equivalent and essentially tell the story in his way. Like, all of his famous movies are based on either journalism or fiction from a time that's been published, and his version is essentially his version of events. I love that about him, and I love that about this. That made more sense to me when I first read the book. As much as I struggled to care about some of the other elements that Kubrick left out, it made me go back and watch the film and wonder, why did he leave these elements out? What story is he telling? And I think I've settled on the idea that The Shining is one of the great examples of how you can tell the same story in two different ways. It's not necessarily that Kubrick is correct and King was wrong, or vice versa. They just arrived at this material with two different lenses, and they covered it in slightly different ways, or quite different ways, and they're both good tellings.
We forgot the DVDs.
I know.
If you, I'll run and get
Yeah, go on.
So yeah, I'm back. We're all good, gang. I've got the DVD. This is the movie. This was one of my introductions to Stephen King. This movie. It is super scary. I remember being really young and just excited to watch it because I'd heard great things. just so good. And Stephen King, while he hates it, he says there are good parts of it, and he's described it as a fancy vehicle with no engine. He says that it doesn't have that sort of drive to it, the human connection. But I really just take everything that we say with a grain of salt, because the fact, let's just say it, we prefer the movie 100%, right? We both prefer it 100%.
Yeah.
Without a doubt in our minds, we both love this movie. But the reason we might like this story that he's telling more is because it's just embedded in our head more.
I think so.
But I've grown to love this just weird and just wacky way to tell the story. This discombobulated, psychological.
Well, it's got those great hallmarks of Kubrick where he does things to mess with the audience.
Yeah,
he'll just something will be in the frame for ages, and then suddenly it will have just switched to the chair not being there, or it's a different kind, or whatever. And there's that stuff. There's tricks with the lighting.
There's a scene where they're walking in front of a car, and the car speeds up to the point where it's going to hit them, but then the thing just cuts, and no one talks about it. No one brings any attention to it. And it's just super weird and cool.
And there's just an absolute eeriness to this film.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go.
I've watched this movie so many times. I've watched it, I can recommend it with so many people. I've watched it with friends, family, and also I love just watching it like in the dark at night time. It's just perfect.
Yeah.
This movie so I have around about 5 movies that I go back and forth and say that they're my favourite movies of all time. This is on that list, but of those 5 movies, this is the one I have the most connection with. So maybe I don't like this movie. I don't like it. Maybe I don't like it more than the other movies that I would say are my favourite. But I have that connection to it.
It's also always really high on all-time lists of horror films, and it's always right near the top of Stephen King adaptations.
Yes,
definitely.
Some people it's my favourite Stephen King
Some
adaptation.
people might like Misery or It or The Green Mile or Shawshank Redemption. Those are other ones that rank pretty high. And with good reason. But this is usually right up there. And it's often up there in the list of Kubrick films too. And it's always up there in people's minds for lists of Jack Nicholson's performances.
Yeah.
And it's one of the great performances he gave.
I think it's the greatest performance he's given from what I can see. It's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. It's so amazing. He's so crazy, and one thing that Stanley Kubrick said that he found the perfect person for this role, because you can be both charmed by him and absolutely terrified by him in such a disturbing way at the very same time.
And Jack Nicholson made a career out of these intoxicating performances where he used his eyes to signal a kind of flashy madness, if you like, a character quirks. And he did that all through his career. I want to give a shout out to Shelley Duvall, who obviously passed away just recently. Her performance in this is often underpraised, and I think there's already been a wave of recognition in the wake of her passing. Talking about really what an amazing performance.
Everyone does amazing.
It's a real, the young kid who plays Danny is brilliant, but between Wendy and Jack, Shelley and Jack Nicholson, it's a real dance. It's a real ballet. And we'll get into with the other movie how King actually wrote Wendy a bit different to how Shelley Duvall is cast and how she plays her. But I think she does amazing. Famously, she didn't get on with Kubrick, and it was hard work.
There's so many, one thing I love about this movie is there's so many
stories,
urban legends about this stuff, and even though it's not a great story, but the idea that Stanley Kubrick was quite horrible to her while filming just adds to
get the performance out of her that he wanted to make her terrifying,
which is pretty awful. But
it's borderline bullying.
Yeah, but it just adds to the wildness of this movie.
There's a great 20-minute-ish documentary by Kubrick's daughter that shows that you can watch on YouTube, that's on some versions of the DVD, that is a behind the scenes, and it shows Shelley Duvall stressed and unhappy, and it shows
Yeah,
Jack
there are
Nicholson
some photos
essentially
of
just
that.
chilling out in between scenes and getting into character. There's this famous meme now of him pacing up and down holding the axe, practicing swinging it, just about hitting a cameraman or a boom operator with the axe as he's practicing, and he's just getting into character quickly. So there's all of that's like this book that I held up, and there are other books and essays. There's all this stuff. I mean, I've got this game here. This is an adventure game based on the Overlook Hotel and The Shining.
We've got to play that.
Yeah, there's all this stuff connected with, largely with the film more so than with the book. It's largely about the film. These little props here, this version of Danny and the Grady twins, they come from the film. All of this stuff, you know, it's classic iconography that he brings into it. The cinematic, the theatre trailer was just the blood pouring out of the out of the elevator, and that's an iconic
There are just
scene.
so many iconic scenes. The Grady twins, here's Johnny, the maze, and also I love the change between the maze and the animal hedges.
I agree.
The animal hedges are good in their own weird way. I keep saying weird and wacky, but that is a good way to describe The Shining, so I'm sorry, I'm probably getting really repetitive, but that is a good way to describe these versions. But the maze makes it just adding layers to the story. The maze is like a way that connects it. And one thing that I just love, this is random, like there are so many things I could say, I could go on forever, but you know, Danny just riding along in his trike and then like running on the carpet and then on the wood, and then on the wood, and it goes from silent to like wood, and it's just really satisfying.
People have gone crazy over the symbolism and the connections in the film. There's that thing with Danny wearing the jersey with the
moon landing.
with the rocket and connecting it to the moon landing, and there's the idea that the carpet, the famous carpet in the hallway, that the pattern on that is connected to that. Also, the people have even gone so far as to suggest that the green knit tie that Jack is wearing when he goes for his interview, that mirrors the maze. Now, some of these things and some even more absurd things came up in a documentary film called Room 237. And that's kind of fun.
I gotta rewatch that because I didn't like it, but I was not really paying attention.
I love it. I mean, it's so stupid because
there's some that I just completely stretch.
It feeds into the wild conspiracy theory idea and that desperation that people have online where they want to be part of a club and they find someone else who believes or enjoys their opinion and, you know, pumps them up for it. But there's also some cool, creepy stuff that doco points out. Interestingly, the name changes in the book from Room 217 to 237 in the...
do you know the reason?
Yeah. Do you want to fill us in? I do know. But...
So the actual hotel where they use exterior shots has an actual 217 room, and basically they reached out to Stanley Kubrick saying, can you please change it to a room we don't have because we don't want that to...
Because we're going to rent this out again. Like, this is we're a business.
But funnily enough, 217 is their most requested room.
Yeah,
now.
of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because people want to be scared and
They want to create their own
horror scene. This could be a whole podcast in itself.
We haven't mentioned the music. I've been holding off because I always go on about music. I was going to leave that to you.
The score in this by Wendy Carlos is so good. Even it's so sad that it's only 2 songs on Spotify and it's not really on vinyl anywhere or anything like that. It's so creepy. The way that the second you like click onto the movie, it's just that like creepy, eerie, drony music while they're driving. The opening scene is incredible.
And some amazing classical pieces that she had chosen and that Kubrick had suggested as well. Amazing. Like beautiful, haunting, eerie score that helps with that whole feeling of discombobulated, of feeling a bit at odds when you're watching it. And the other thing that we'll quickly mention is there are 2 versions of this film.
Yeah, this is there's one that's like 2 hours and there's one that's like 2.5 hours. My opinion on this is that the 2.5 hour one is obviously superior, but as someone who's like watched it so many times, rewatching it, the 2 hour one is the way to go. It just feels it's a lot.
Yeah, the
smoother.
2 hour one is the popcorn movie.
Yeah, definitely.
The 2.5 hour one is the art house version.
Definitely. In the 2-hour one, in the 2.5 hour one, you'll get like these long shots of the hotel and these long extended scenes of conversations that aren't really major parts of the movie, but in retrospect, they do add a lot to this movie. But once you've seen it more than 5 times, like us, you'll want a break.
I want to also, we should wrap up this section and review the film, but I want to just double back on that Shelley Duvall spiel and say one thing I actually wrote a little bit about this after she, in an obituary post when she died, but to me, her version of Wendy is amazing for the fact that she's vulnerable and helpless and borderline pathetic, but really strong as well. She cares about her son. She's worried for her husband, but he's morphed into a monster essentially in front of her. She doesn't recognise him. She conveys all of this so well. And you and I have talked about this, and I'm sure other people think this. Maybe people listening and watching have thought this before too about other movies. How is it in horror films that, your partner or your best friend or your child dies in front of you and you just carry on and somehow become stronger and pick up an axe and decide, damn you, I'm going to kill that villain? Like, wouldn't you just be a crumpled heap on the floor going, take me too? And she, I think, encapsulates that. She sells that so brilliantly. And I maybe didn't clock that the first time I watched it, but certainly in rewatches of the film, that's become part of the powerfulness of her performance.
I have a friend who's also a massive fan of this movie and says that every time he watches it, he does get a little bit annoyed at like her screaming all the time and wailing.
Your friend's wrong.
But yeah, I agree with him in some sense, but still, everyone's performance in this is amazing. It is so good. And just, I want to say one more trivia thing about Jack Nicholson's performance. Stephen King also thought he was too old because Jack Nicholson was around about 40 to 50 while recording this. Filming this. It's just, but he does it so well. He is the best Jack Torrance. In my opinion, everything about this movie is just better.
So what are we going to rate this?
I'm gonna give it a 5. Nah, strong 10.
Yeah.
Just talking about it, it makes me want to watch this again. Like, the second I pause this, I really want to just go and watch it straight away.
I reckon we'll be watching this when we finish recording this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
This might be my favourite movie of all time. Screw it. All the other ones I'm thinking of, Pulp Fiction, nah, they don't have anything on this. This could be my favourite movie of all time. So good. I can't yap about it enough, even though we've been yapping about it a lot.
I'm going to give it a 10 as well. I don't need to say any more. You've summed it up well. We're going to follow it up with a quick mention and discussion of this movie, which is called Stephen King's The Shining, a TV movie that plays in 3 parts, that was written by King, produced by King. So this is him basically saying, this is my version, this is how you should make a film treatment of the book, because this includes everything. That's what he's really saying, I think. So
this movie is a whopping 4.5 hours
It's a TV miniseries,
yes,
to be fair.
It comes in 3 episodes that are 85 minutes long, and we watched it over the course of 3 nights, which is the way to do it. Otherwise, you will get so bored. And so, like, I just realized, like, I was like, what if we watched this in 1 sitting or 2 or whatever?
Yeah.
I really loved the first episode, but slowly it got really boring and tedious, and it's just kind of like, who does Stephen King think he is to just yap so long?
They get a few things wrong in this. The topiary hedges coming to life. They can't render that. This is 1997. They can't do it. Like now, you'd make a good version of walking hedges, but
they are so disgusting.
It's like something out of play school.
They are so stupid.
Yeah.
They look horrendous.
Yeah.
It's like green blobs that are like really. It's like green blobs that are like completely blurry on your screen. They look like yellow. They look like piss stains.
It highlights what you said about the hedges in the book. It highlights the goofiness, but not in a good way at all. Like in the worst way possible.
The other thing that is absolutely bombastic about like the movie and like the representation of certain characters is Tony. Tony's really only in it for like the first episode, and he only appears like for 1 minute at least 3 times. So they're basically, Stephen King kind of just went, we'll put him in just so he's in, but like he's just like a goofy teenager with big comically round glasses and
Who appears in a mirror.
yeah, and also floating
Yeah.
over a like
All that
CGI
sort of
back
stuff.
screen.
Yeah.
It's awful. He looks so disgusting. Like in the book, he's really creepy because like he's super far away and he's like tiny. He's like a dot. But in this one, he's like a full teenager, and he's not scary. He's not mysterious. He's just an absolute goofball.
So I reckon a lot of people in this film and connected with this film tried quite hard, and it's not even quite a noble failure. It's proof that sometimes the book should exist as the book and the film should allow it to be different. It
However,
highlights that point I tried to make, that you know, you can tell the story in 2 different ways. This is trying to make a film version of the book, and overall it doesn't succeed at all.
in my opinion, like I think I like this movie a lot more than you do.
Yeah, but I've seen it
You've
3
seen
times.
it 3 times. That was what I was just about to
Yeah.
say. So I'm
I've
sure
done
that
that.
if I've watched it 3 times, I'd probably be like actually
Yeah.
mad at the movie. I'd
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
hate it because it's
Yeah.
super long. I don't need to see it again necessarily. Maybe eventually. It's got some really high. It's got some really high highs, but some really low lows.
It's got some great scenes. It's got some cool shots, some
um,
cool ideas.
The lady in room 217
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
Overall, I just think, and there's so much more that's great, but overall, I just think it's too long. It's a bit goofy in parts, but I'm really glad it exists.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I'm glad that there is a more Stephen Kingified adaptation to sort of isolate
I
these two
wonder if-
completely different versions of the
Yeah.
story, the King one and the Kubrick one.
I wonder if this helped him come to the realization that Kubrick hadn't done a bad job.
Maybe.
Some shout outs about some of the cool things in this. The people. Mick Garris, the director, has done a lot of work adapting King. So his name will come up again in this podcast. Some of you will be familiar with it already. I don't think he's ever knocked it out of the park, but I love that he's a fan, and he has made some good movies outside of the King sphere. Nicholas Pike, the film composer, beautiful work, very subtle, really great. The actors, Rebecca De Mornay.
She is the best
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah.
And I don't love Jack Torrance,
Stephen
but I
Weber.
don't hate him.
Yeah, so Stephen Weber, people my vintage might remember him from the TV show Wings. A little bit of a curious choice. Tries to bring a bit of an early Jim Carrey energy to some of the manic scenes and then pulls back. I'm not too displeased with him being in
I'm
there.
not displeased. I just feel like
I just think it's pushing water uphill with a rate to try and
it's
do Jack Torrance after Jack Nicholson's done it.
It's
And I
like-
think he probably felt that.
like if you're at like a stand-up comedy or a poetry reading, and like this just like top tier performance.
You got to
happens
follow
first,
a turkey has to
and
follow
then
an eagle. Yeah. So one other thing about Stephen Weber is he's a big King fan. He actually reads a lot of the audiobooks, and I've heard him talk on another podcast about how he's got this whole background in reading the books and grew up a fan. So I like that about it. But Rebecca De Mornay, she was sort of at the end of her hot streak in the movies, I think, in '97 with this stuff. But she plays the version of Wendy that is obviously much closer to the page, because this is written by King. He actually writes about her in the book as being blonde. I don't know what his obsession or fixation with that is, but he does. So
he had a blonde woman fetish
so
in the 80s.
yeah, exactly. So
and
she's cast as I guess it's shorthand for the stereotype of the ideal back then is what he's going for. But she has a strength, a more outward strength. She's a lot tougher as a character than the Shelley Duvall version. So it's interesting to see that. I don't know that it's successful. The little kid that plays Danny, though, he's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to punch him every time I saw him. What is
I
that
haven't-
haircut?
I haven't been to Wikipedia, but I sincerely hope he's not acting, and that he gave up
he's a
shortly
former
after this.
actor.
Yeah, good. He felt like a former actor halfway
He
through
looks like a
this.
chipmunk.
Yeah, so I wasn't a fan of him, but yeah, look, I've sat through this 3 times. That will be the last time I watch it. That was difficult. What are you going to give this?
I'll give it an actually pretty decent rating of a 6, and the reason I'm going to give it a 6 is that episode 1 was so good. But if I'm rating it apart from episode 1, it's like a 4. I'm gonna give it a 6.
I also want to say Stephen King has quite a funny cameo in this. That's
His
kinda
name
cool.
is Gage Creed,
Yeah.
even though that's not confirmed,
Yeah.
which is the baby in Pet Sematary, so that's
Yeah.
that's pretty
It's
stupid.
his silly
There's
little
no-
deep cut.
There's no reason for that, but yeah.
It's just his own joke to himself. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. It's not a great movie, but I also am still pleased that it exists. I like the attempt, and I like that King backed himself and went, you know what, this is the movie that should have been made. And then, as I say, maybe he realised, maybe not. Maybe Kubrick did get it right.
That might be our sort of furthest away opinions yet in the podcast, because I think 1 out of 10, anything from 1 out of 10 to 3 out of 10 is awful. 4 out of 10 is like really bad. 5 is like really mid, and then 6 is good. Then anything above 7 is incredible.
Okay. Maybe I changed my mind. Maybe I'll give it a 3.
Really?
Yep.
I'm giving it a 3.
Yeah. I held this up before. This is a movie tie-in version of the first 3 novels. Obviously, this edition is very much about The Shining. It would have come out when the movie came out. I've also got this weird version, which I don't understand this. 3 novels in 1 volume. The Shining, Carrie, and Misery. I don't get it.
That's
Beyond
weird.
the fact that, well, they're 3 of the more successful movies. And it's a pretty whack cover too. And again, I guess this one came out when Misery was a movie, and it was just trying to connect Misery, the story, with the fact that 2 other successful King novels had been turned into movies. What else do we need to say? Is that it? We're just about done, sure.
Yeah, this has been a big yap fest.
Yeah, but we love The Shining.
We love The Shining.
We know we're not wrong. We know lots of people love The Shining. I will always love the movie more than the book, but I'm glad I got to the book.
Also, I just want to say, 10 out of 10. I'm not going to throw around easily in this podcast. I'm going to limit it. I'm going to use it like 5 times, and I don't know what those are going to be. Yeah, 10 out of 10 is reserved for the best of the best. The things that are just like favorites territory, and this is beyond favorites territory, and then the book is also incredible. So everything I even like the miniseries, even though all of its flaws, that kind of adds to it in my opinion, in a way. 3 out of 10 is weird.
Yeah, well, deal with it. That's the thing though, is that we are, you do become suckers for, all of the ephemera and all of the lore with this stuff, this book is only a slim volume, and it's a series, British Film Institute Film Classics. I've got a few of them. They're pretty good overall, but this is only a 100-page volume, but I had to have this and read this because I love The Shining, and it did give me some stories that I hadn't got elsewhere. It did make me go, it just jolts you back into the world where you're like, I'm going to watch the film again. Which version am I going to watch? Am I going to watch the 160-minute version or the 129-minute version,
Next episode is The Stand.
We thought this was big. The Stand is the biggest thing he's ever done.
So, The Stand, we're doing it from a 1978 perspective. However, in 1978, it was a little bit shorter. He had to edit at least 500 pages, making it 800 pages. But nobody reads that anymore. And so, technically, The Stand is still his 4th book. So we're just going to jump into it and do the 1,300-page book, Behemoth.
Which
that
you
is The
are
Stand.
currently still
I am
reading.
currently reading and in page 300, and it's just crazy to me to think that right now I'm at the part where most
in the
average.
beginning.
I'm at the part where most average books are reaching their final
Wrapping
act,
up.
if not like the epilogue. And right now I'm literally just witnessing the characters
Get to know one another.
get to like not even know one
Not
another.
even all of them.
Like they don't know each other yet.
Yeah.
They're just like doing their average things, and
Yeah.
like people are starting to slowly die, but they're just like walking down the road and having conversations at the moment. It's wild how he's made it last for 300 pages. But hey, I'm catching a vibe. I'm starting to want to read it. But also, technically, if we were doing it
Chronologically
completely,
full.
completely full, deep cut, next episode would be Rage. However, Rage is part of the Buckman books. It's under his pseudonym Richard Buckman. So in 1977, so still the same year as The Shining, which is what we're doing right now, he released it. And it was not known to the public that he was king. And also, if you want to watch a 30-minute podcast about Rage, then you're a nutter. So we're not going to do it for that reason.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do it with any of the other three Buckman books. They're not novellas, they're novels, but we're going to do them in one episode because some of them are kind of that we couldn't drag them on for a whole.
And we're not going to do 1978's debut short story collection Night Shift, although we'll probably reference it because
we are doing that separately.
The standard come from a story that is in there, much like Salem's Lot. But yeah, we've told you this, and we'll continue to remind you. We're doing the novels. So next time you see us, we will be very tired because we will have completed a nearly 1,400-page book and 2 miniseries.
One being 10 hours.
Yeah, one series and one miniseries. We won't be able to stand.